So we're going to be talking about anxiety. So many parents talk about their children experiencing huge amounts of anxiety, and even these unexplained fears that these little ones seem to have. And so, yes, in our work, we start looking at, again, reflexes. And we see that reflexes, some of them emerge even in utero. And so what does this mean to us? For many years, I used to ask, why do they always want all this information when I'm filling out these forms about for my son, going into therapy? How was your pregnancy? How was the birth? How was your child just after the birth? And I used to think, but that's so long ago. How can this have such a profound impact on now? And obviously, through the work that I've come to do, I've realized that actually, yes, because this is where the miracle happens. This is where the baby's being built, being put together. And of course, this is where the survival kit, our reflexes, are put into place so that this child has got this kit for survival, but also this kit, these reflexes that are going to ensure movement, automatic movement, and ready the body for the next developmental stage. And so they are very important to have, but they're very important to have for the job that they need to do. And then they need to be packed away. And we say packed away, we don't ever want them to go away entirely, because this is the body's survival kit. And because we're all unique, each of us will have our favorites. And so when we have or experience a trauma in life, it's often then certain of these reflexes we might see present themselves once more as the mind and body gets a sense that I'm not safe and need extra support during this time. Obviously, as we get older and also our muscles start deteriorating, then we see these things coming up again, stirring up again, trying to keep us safe. But of course, when these reflexes are present when we don't need them to be, they no longer serve a purpose, but rather begin to interfere with life. And so the very first reflex, our fear paralysis reflex, has so much to do with anxiety and fear that we're seeing in our kids. So when we start with a kid and we see that this child has been born premature to their due date, or even post their due date, we see that this timing could be off with regards to this reflex. We also know that in modern life, we have, thank goodness, yes, all these options for birth, because birth in itself is very dangerous. And so, yes, we've got things like the C-section that have helped so many of our little ones come into the world, mine included. We also then have the vacuum forceps. We get to choose whether we're going to be taking, those drugs that are going to help us during this time. But what we end up doing, nevertheless, we end up interfering with an otherwise very natural process. And so, yes, when we get to choose, if we can, if we're brave enough, if we're strong enough, it's always best to choose the most natural way forward, because there is reason and purpose in every little step on this developmental chart that we end up ticking and filling out and checking our kids reach. Every single little piece has got a reason. And so, yes, I get quite anxious when I approach parents, and they very proudly also tell me that their children didn't crawl, because it again means that they've missed a very, very, very important step along this road to growing up, developing, and becoming a strong and stable person who can succeed in life. So just to look, what does it mean if I still have this fear paralysis reflex active? So firstly, to understand what is its purpose. So it emerges in utero, and it's this all acting possum type thing, this ability to hold one's breath and play dead as such, be as still as possible until the threat goes away. Makes sense why a helpless little baby might want this reflex, because there is so much that it cannot yet do for itself. However, it does have this option to stop moving and, of course, wait for danger to pass. Because as I'm talking, you can see that this is then linked to this aspect of danger. When it is triggered, my body and mind get the message that I am in a dangerous place. And so the body and mind work very, very interestingly. And of course, we see in life that patterns and neurological patterns and way that we move through behaviors are triggered not by an event, but by an emotion. which is quite smart, isn't it? Because we are absolutely guaranteed that similar events might happen, but never the same. And so the body and mind needs to base itself on something far more concrete. And so, of course, the emotion that it then feels triggers the response. And so, of course, we can also then start experiencing this reflex due to an emotion. It's reflexes are usually triggered by input or stimuli, and of course, as I say, emotion is now one very big part of that. And so these children, as they get these reflexes triggered, it's not necessarily connected to something, but all of a sudden they feel in danger, they feel their lives in threat, they go into fight, flight, and this one freeze specifically, and they can't tell you why they feel a certain way. And so begins the path to unexplained fears, anxieties, and separation anxieties, and all sorts. Obviously, as children begin to experience this and link it with then an event or an emotion, it becomes more dangerous, because as they reinforce this could in actual fact become a behavioral pattern that gets stirred up for certain things. So just to go into the fear paralysis reflex and to see what this could actually do and how it could present, remembering that this is just a checklist as such that we use to help us identify if it possibly could be this reflex that's playing up. And so as we go through this, your child might not tick off all of these, but one or two you might say, that's my son, that's my daughter. And of course, that's what we're looking for. The ones that stand out for us, are they speaking to us today within this list? And so we see, with regards to this, that children could be very withdrawn. Okay? We see also, and not always, but we see that children could also be electively mute. So that means they select to not talk, or they all of a sudden cannot talk. Okay? And this is the poor child we're saying, tell us what's wrong, tell us what's wrong, tell us what you're scared of. And of course, they cannot actually say anything. We see excessive shyness. So that child who is incredibly shy and clinging to our legs and doesn't want to even, we could stand on our head, they're not going to move forward. Very low tolerance to stress with regards to this reflex if it's active. We can see very senses also very sensitive. So we're talking now again sensory processing disorders that we're seeing coming out from this. So sensitive to bright light, sensitive to loud noises, sensitive to certain touch and feels, sensitive to certain touch and feels and textures in our mouth as such even. So when we're looking at overall, that these are overall sensitive, we see sensitivity to smell being one of them. Interestingly, we see vestibular difficulties. So these children could also have motion sickness. We can also see that these children, as I've mentioned, are going to be incredibly anxious, incredibly insecure, and they also might act out. And in understanding that this is putting them into a place where they are genuinely fearful, we can understand why they might act out if they feel on some level that they actually have to defend themselves. Okay, we also have some autistic-like symptoms that may come from this reflex being out. And what we find with many of our children on the spectrum, or many of our ADHD children, is that they actually do have many reflexes that need working on. Poor adaptability and flexibility. Okay, excessive compulsive symptoms. Another autistic one, we see making eye contact is difficult, but again, remember this is now over and above just those children on the spectrum. We see chronic procrastination, this willingness to just stand back and just not get involved and take action. Depression, sleep disturbances. Now, this is very interesting. Sleep disturbances, sleepwalking, apnea, and nightmares. And yes, nightmares and that are age appropriate at certain ages. And of course, we take everything into account when we're working with a kid. We look at their age, we look at where they're at, we look at what they've been watching, what they're being exposed to. But also what we do want to understand particularly is when there is just these unexplained fears. And so, yes, this is talking very much into this here. Night terrors, and even difficulty with developing a sleeping pattern. We've got also fear of new things, of things that I've never done before. I don't know how to respond. I don't know how I should respond. And so I enter that with much anxiety, much trepidation, if I said it right. And yeah, we've got this huge amount of fear. We get things like separation anxiety, being over clingy, insecure, and another one, lack of self-confidence, excess worrying, and these children could be a loner or a daydreamer, and they have the poor ability to share sometimes and can be abrupt, rude, or aggressive, again, knowing that they're in the state of absolute fear. So in knowing that, you know, there's so many things that we can do, and of course our movements then work back into this. But yes, it's very much about holding one's breath, not being able to breathe through. And we will notice with these kids, as their eyes get really wide when this reflex gets triggered, they hold their breath as well. This reflex will actually develop, or should develop, or merge into what we call the morrow, which we will talk about at a later stage. But yes, there's many things that we could do, as I say. But makes a lot of sense. So perhaps if you've got a child and you're worried that they're very anxious and they have no reason to be, maybe consider, you know, how was your pregnancy? How was their birth? What was that birth story like? And perhaps reach out to us, and then we can see what kind of movements we can do, what kind of sessions we can put together for your child so that we could work on these reflexes.